Today we're going to be multiplying fractions and simplifying those fractions by dividing with common factors. We're also going to use the order of operations and multiplying fractions to show you guys that order of operations works with any expressions, and we can put these new things that we're learning within those order of operations, because you guys are going to see that on homework, on tests, on EOG, all that stuff. So when we multiply fractions, we've got three simple steps. First step, you multiply the denominators of each fraction by each other. So look at this first example right down here. Denominators are bottom numbers, so 5 times 7 gives you 35. Then your second step is to multiply the numerators, that's your top number, of each fraction by each other. So 2 times 6 gives you 12. And then step 3 is to simplify by finding the greatest common factor for the numerator and the denominator. Now in this case right here, 12 and 35, they don't have any common factors other than 1, and if you divide by 1, then you get the same thing. And if you didn't know that, that's okay. You can always list out your factors. Factors of 12 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. And then factors of 35 are 1, 5, 7, and 35. We don't have any in common other than 1, so that's it. So our final answer there is 12 over 35. Now if we look at the second example here, 1/4 times 2/3, same steps. Step 1, multiply the denominators of each fraction by each other. So denominators, 4 times 3, that gives me 12. And then multiply your numerators, that's 1 times 2. 1 times 2 is 2. So then we have to simplify by finding my greatest common factor of the numerator and the denominator. So in case you don't know, you can always list them out. Factors of 2 are 1 and 2. Factors of 12 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. The greatest one they have in common is 2. So my GCF is 2, which means I divide by 2 on the top and the bottom. 2 divided by 2 gives me 1. 12 divided by 2 gives me 6. So my final reduced answer is 1/6. And that's all you got to do. Now, we can put this into play with our order of operations. We still do the order of operations the same exact way. Make sure you write your PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally so you don't forget the order to do this in. First step is always your parentheses. So we're going to perform that operation inside of the parentheses. We're subtracting here. Now remember, to subtract fractions, you have to get an equivalent fraction with a common denominator. So we have to figure out what is my common denominator, 4 and 3. So I've got to list out what are my multiples and find my least common one. So multiples of 3, I've got 3, 6, 9, 12. And multiples of 4, I have 4, 8, and 12. There it is. That's my least common multiple. So I've got to get from 4 to 12 and from 3 to 12. Now to get from 4 to 12, I multiply by 1, 2, 3, right there. If I do it to the bottom, I have to do it to the top. So 3 times 3 as well. And then my new fraction here, my equivalent fraction, 3 times 3 is 9, and 4 times 3 is 12. So I'm going to rewrite my parentheses there so I don't forget them. And then I've got to get from 3 to 12. So that took me 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So I multiply by 4 on the bottom and on the top. 1 times 4 gives me 4. 3 times 4 gives me 12. Don't forget your subtraction sign there. Close those parentheses and rewrite your times 1/2. Now here, I can solve inside these parentheses because I have common denominators. 9 minus 4 gives me 5, and put that over 12. And then I rewrite my times 1/2. Now, flip that over to the back. Second step when we're doing order of operations here. I've got 5/12 times 1/2 now. Same thing as what we just did. I multiply my denominators. 12 times 2 gives me 24. And 5 times 1 gives me 5. And my greatest common factor of those two numbers is 1. So I can't simplify. That's my final answer right there. Now we're going to do a couple of practice problems here. We have 4/5 plus 2/3 times 2/9. So If you look inside that parentheses, what you got to do first, we don't have common denominators, so we've got to find them. We've got to list out our multiples. So multiples of 3, I have 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15. I'm going to stop there because 15 is a multiple of 5. And then I'm going to list out 5, 10, 15. There it is. So now I've got to get from both of these numbers to 15. So I've got to change 4/5 into a number that has a denominator of 15. So to get from 5 to 15, I'll go 1, 2, 3 times. So I multiply that 5 by 3, and whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So 4 times 3. 4 times 3 gives me 12. 5 times 3 gives me 15. So there's my first fraction. And I'm adding here. So then I look over here at my 3. It took me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So I do 3 times 5, and I do 2 times 5, because whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. 3 times 5 gives me 15, and 2 times 5 gives me 10. So inside the parentheses, I now have 12 fifteenths plus 10 fifteenths. And then I'm going to rewrite my outside times 2 ninths. So I've got common denominators. I can now add them. So 12 and 10 gives me 22 fifteenths. And then I'm multiplying by 2 ninths. Again, I'm multiplying fractions. I don't have to find a common denominator now. So I got to multiply straight across the bottom. 15 times 9. If I don't know that right off the top of my head, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to work it out. 9 times 5 gives me 45. And then carry that 4. 9 times 1 gives me 9. Plus that 4 gives me 13. So 15 times 9 is 135. And then 22 times 2 is 44. 44 over 135, they don't have a greatest common factor other than 1, so we're not going to do that. So that is your simplified answer. Let's do another one real quick. We got 2/4 times 1/5 plus 1/2. Well, I don't have any parentheses, so what am I going to do first? I'm going to follow the order of operations. Parentheses, exponents, none of those. Multiplication, there it is. That's what I got to do first. So I've got to do 2/4 times 1/5. Multiplying fractions, remember I go straight across the bottom. 4 times 5 is 20. And then straight across the top, 2 times 1 is 2. So that fraction is 2/20. And then I'm going to add 1/2 to that. Now I'm adding fractions, so I have to find a common denominator. Remember, finding a common denominator is listing out your multiples. And I'm looking at these two numbers. I know that 2 is a factor of 20. So that means 20 can be my common denominator. So I got to figure out, how do I get from 2 to 20? 2 times what is 20? 2 times 10 is 20. If I do it to the bottom, I got to do it to the top. So then I rewrite my problem, 2/20 plus, now here's my new one, 2 times 10 is 20, and 1 times 10 is 10. So 2/20 plus 10/20 gives me 12/20. Now I've got to simplify, find my greatest common factor here. Factors of 12 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. Factors of 20, I got 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, and 20. Greatest common factor I have here is 4. So I can divide both of these numbers by 4. And 12 divided by 4 is 3, and 20 divided by 4 is 5. So 3/5 is my reduced fraction. Now you could have also divided right here by 2 because you know that both of them are even numbers. You just would have had to do it another time. You would have added another step because it's not your greatest common factor. It is a common factor, but to reduce all the way down, you have to use your GCF, your greatest common factor. All right, let's do one more example before we move on to classwork. Martha is hungry and decides to eat whatever is in the fridge. There is 6/7 of leftover pizza in the fridge. Martha eats 1/4 of that leftover pizza. How much is left? So if Martha eats 1/4 of that leftover pizza, there's your key right there, of that leftover pizza. Of, box that word in. Remember, you guys have learned this before, that of tells me that I'm multiplying. So what I'm doing is 1/4 of the leftover pizza, which is 6/7 of a pizza. So 1/4 of 6/7 means that I'm doing 1/4 times 6/7. Now I'm multiplying these fractions, so I go straight across the bottom. 4 times 7 is 28. And I go straight across the top. 1 times 6 is 6. Now looking at these two numbers, I know they're both even, so let's just go ahead and try dividing by 2. And 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. 28 divided by 2 gives me 14. Can't reduce that anymore, so 3/14 of the pizza is left, and you're all done. Now, if we go ahead and look at your classwork here, these directions up here at the top, they say pretty much the same thing that your notes do. So you can either use your notes or you can use the top of this classwork as you get started on this. You need to make sure you complete the front and the back, and we'll go over it in just a little bit.